안녕하세요, 엄마. Hi, Mama.
Hello.
This is the
안녕.
interview for my senior capstone project that I will be basing this project on. So this is an interview that I'm going to be asking you 10 questions in. A lot of them have to do with your experience with adoption. So starting with the first question, can you share what you know or were told about the circumstances of your adoption?
My situation is unique in that I was older and I knew my family. So when I was put up for adoption, it was actually all orchestrated by my Korean aunt who, after seeing my parents struggling to raise me and not being able to take care of me, and then when I burned my arm when I was 9, they decided that they couldn't get, they wanted to have they wanted me to have a better life, so they put me up for adoption. So I always knew who my family was, and that I was put up for adoption because we were poor and I was a girl and I had a physical scar on my arm.
Very nice. Okay, question number 2. At age 10, you were old enough to understand the shift. What were your first impressions of your adoptive country and family?
My first experience of, I guess, anything outside of Korea was my airplane ride. It was a long 16-hour flight, and I remember being very sick, airsick, and so I remember throwing up and being anxious about like what it was gonna be like. And then I remember I was actually escorted on the airplane to my adoptive family by the missionary who ran the orphanage, Jane White, and she was a very mean lady. So like I remember being really sick and not wanting to throw up in front of her because I thought I would get in trouble. So that was my experience of my first experience outside of Korea. And then I remember like when I lived in Korea, they always talked about like America was like the streets were paved in gold, like that weird. Well, now I think it's weird, but like that's how they viewed America, and like they thought everyone was really wealthy, and so I had assumed that as well. And I remember my adoptive family coming to their home. I thought they were rich because they had, I think, 4 bedrooms, 2 cars, and I remember being just really fascinated by like our toilets because I didn't have flushing toilets where I lived in Korea. And eating every day was a really big deal because I didn't eat every day in Korea. Um, and then one big cultural shock was obviously the food and all those things, but as a kid, you remember some of the little odd details. And one was we had a family pet. And in Korea, the only experience of an animal or pet was like wild dogs. I didn't have any pets, and so like I remember being chased by wild dogs in the alleyways in the darkness of night, and so when I came here, my adoptive family had a little, I think, Cocker Poo was the name, like, a little dog. And I remember being like deathly afraid of that little black dog. And poor Muffy had to like sleep outside for a month until I got used to her.
Mm-hmm.
So those little details that you don't necessarily think is a big deal, but you remember those, or I remember those.
That's very interesting. How did your adoptive family and community treat your Korean heritage? Was it acknowledged, encouraged, or ignored?
It was acknowledged, but it was more like a novelty. Their attitude really was, and it wasn't just them. It was like that was the time, and the fact that they like, you are now American, so you just need to assimilate. They like, it wasn't like, oh, don't ever think about Korea, but it was like, but they really never talked about it. And then also growing up in Tucson, where there's not a lot of Asians to see, it was kind of easy to just not think about that and just wanted to, be white and American.
Did you ever feel different growing up, racially, culturally, or socially from those around you? I guess this ties into the last question. And how did you cope with those feelings?
Absolutely. I growing up, I hated the way I looked because everybody around me had blonde hair, blue eyes, and I had little cheeky eyes. And it was the time in our world where, like, doing this and making eye squinty eyes is like normal. That's what kids. I mean, kids are cruelly honest, and so they definitely. I got taunted, and I didn't have an accent. Like, I learned how to speak English in 3 months because I was so determined. But like sometimes an accent would, or some I would say some certain things that had an accent, and then the kids would like mimic me and make fun of me. Um, I adjusted by trying to just be American. Like, Mia is part of my Korean name, and so my and at that time I didn't know a lot of Mias, especially like the way I wrote it. And so I think mostly I just didn't want to be different. I just wanted to blend in. And so I used to call myself Michelle, and just really my way of coping with it was denying that I was Korean.
What was your Korean name?
Han Mi-kyung.
Were there moments when you actively sought out Korean culture or language? If so, what motivated you?
When I turned 20, well, so going back a little bit, my when I was 10 when I was adopted, and up until I was about 14, 15, I tried really hard and complied to be Nelson, which is what my adoptive family's last name is. But then when I turned like 15, 16, I became rebellious and was like, screw this. I want to try to be myself, I guess. So that's really when I started like just longing for my cultural identity. But honestly, at the same time, I wasn't sure if it was just because I was a teenager and being rebellious too, right? But I remember just a real longing. And when I turned 18, I moved out on my own because I wanted to be independent, whatever. But like, I had always had a dream of going to New York City because, like, looking back at that time, I was like, oh, because New York's cool and that's where everything's happening and all that. But in looking back, in hindsight, I realized I was looking for my cultural identity. I was looking for people that look like me. And so I remember going to this when I moved I moved to New Jersey. So going back even further, one of the reasons how I ended up going to New Jersey, New York area was I became a nanny. But the reason why I became a nanny is because when I was 18, I had such a heart burning desire to have kids. And it wasn't because I wanted to have kids because I was prepared. It was more that I wanted somebody that looked like me. And so I remember going to, after I moved to New Jersey, I went to this Korean church. And I remember just feeling like in shock because here are these people that finally, like, I look like them, right? And on one hand, it was like a shock that I look like them, but on the other, I didn't like it. I felt like I was too American. So it's like a both of like a familiarity, but then also like I don't belong, right? But I remember I watched a lady, a Korean mom with a little Korean baby, and I just like that made me cry. I remember going home and crying because it made me think of my birth mom and like, what was she like and what was she doing? Like, it made me start wanting to search. I mean, I knew, but like, it's interesting because at the time when I was growing up, like, calling Korea was like it's like calling Mars, as far as like it was really, really expensive, so you don't do it, right? And so it wasn't like I could call so easily. Like, now it's so much easier, we have all these different apps and stuff. And so I think that made it even more of a longing for me because it wasn't like readily available. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm tearing up too. How did media or pop culture influence your perception of Korean identity or your own? Or was there an influence?
Well, there was an influence in the fact that there wasn't any,
Mm.
right? Like, so I didn't see many people that looked like me. In fact, I remember when Karate Kid came out and there was an Asian love interest. It was actually like Karate Kid Part 3. I think it wasn't the first one. Like, it was whenever, and one of them was a love interest and she was Asian. And I remember, like, wow, like, she's so beautiful, right? The actress, and going, like, just mesmerized by her because I finally saw a face that looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
But then the opposite of that was like, I didn't have anybody that looked like me. And so there was like, I just felt that I was ugly because I didn't see myself in any of the things that I looked at, including my adoptive parents. My adoptive parents had blonde hair and blue eyes, and like my adoptive mom has a Barbie figure. Like, I don't. That's not who I am. I'm short and no big boobs. I'm a typical Asian lady, and so it was. I made that mean that I didn't belong, and that I wasn't pretty because I didn't fit into the standard beauty that was at that time. But also, like, I at school, like, I wasn't very popular. I was popular because I was liked because I was a nice kid,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't popular because I looked different. Like, I wasn't like the blonde cheerleader,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Mm. Well, have you ever been back to Korea? If so, what was that experience like for you emotionally and culturally?
I've been back to Korea 6 times now, but the first time I went back, I was 24, and I reunited with my birth mom, and that's when I found out that I had a half brother, and my birth dad had passed away before I went back, and the person that I really wanted to see was my Hamani, my grandmother, because she's the one that really raised me, but she had passed away before I went back to Korea. So I remember going back, and it was interesting because I I went to visit the orphanage that I come from, that I stayed at, and I was waiting there to have to meet my biological mom, and like there was like some kind of a delay, right? And I was really mad. Like, I felt abandoned again, even though it was only like like a day delay in whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I remember just feeling so like all my emotions were just obviously on blast, I suppose. And then when I met her, it was such a weird feeling because I thought about her and dreamt about her, but it was like I didn't see her since I was a little baby, like since I was 4, and so I don't remember what she looked like. I mean, I had a few pictures of her, but I just didn't remember what she looked like. And I remember when I saw her, I'm looking at her face and I'm looking for myself I'm looking at like her hands and her earlobes and her feet, and I'm looking to see where we're common, and like we have the same hands, and we have the same body build, but she had a sad frown on her face, and like that was very different. So, but what was interesting is that, like, I remember in that moment I felt like I honored her because she's this person gave me life, but like I didn't feel like she was my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that experience of having that maternal motherly relationship and love wasn't there. Like, I loved her in a different way, and I felt that my adoptive mom was my real mom because she was the one that was actually there for me when I was sick and all those type of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
um so I remember just being really surprised by, I thought I would be like, yeah, like, I love you, you're my mom, and I didn't have that as much as I thought. Yeah.
Well, this next question is kind of tied into that. But did you ever find your birth family, or were you interested in doing so? Why or why not? Well, I guess you just answered that.
Yeah.
You did speak about your first experience with going to Korea, but what about, well, the one that I personally know is your last experience with
Yeah.
going to Korea. Could you speak about that at all?
Yeah. So we went in 2023. I was fortunate enough to be able to obviously bring the whole family. And so this time I had my husband and 4 children. It was such a beautiful experience on so many different levels. One is that I was so grateful because I found out that my biological mom had Alzheimer's. And so there was a important time factor as far as, I wanted to go before she completely lost her memory. So that was great to be able to see her again. But it was also interesting because, like, the way my family was received to my biological family, like my own family, I mean, in that, like, because of like the decline of birth rate in Korea, like they were so happy that I had 4 kids. You know what I mean? And like I know that's not something that would have been very important or celebrated had I gone back at 19. Not that I would have 4 kids at 19 or 20, but you know what I mean? Like because of the different situation that's happening, they really were so happy that I had 4 kids, and the fact that like you guys have very much identify as Koreans and love the Korean culture. They were really happy about that. Um, but it's still weird. Like there's one side of me where there's the familiarity of little things like how the streets are. That Korea is very mountainous, and so there's a lot of hills and up and down, and the way that houses are, like those all look very familiar to me. But then of course the food is what I'm so familiar with, but at the same time still feeling like a foreigner when I'm there. I still feel like an American, and this is something that's very common with all of us adoptees, is that we don't really fit in completely as in Korea or in America. Yeah.
Looking back, how has your identity as a Korean adoptee changed over time?
A lot. I feel more Korean than ever before, especially obviously with the way I cook a lot of Korean food, and also because it's now culturally it's so accepted. Really, from what I see, like K-pop had a huge influence on mainstream or normalizing Korean culture. One great example is when I was younger, I remember I brought kimchi to business, and like one of the people were like, "Oh my God, what is that smell?" Right? And like Lysol, just like, and I was so embarrassed. Like she was like the head lady of the department, and like I couldn't even say it was me because I was so embarrassed and ashamed. To now, like where I work, when I make kimchi, we usually make a big thing of it. Like I remember I brought a little a jar of it to one of the teachers, and they were like, and they found out that like Miss Mia made fresh homemade kimchi. I had like 6 teachers come up to me, "Can you make me some kimchi? Can I have some of the kimchi?" Even kids, like young kids, are like asking me for kimchi. "Oh, I love kimchi." Like it's so different. Like like I said, when I was growing up, it was because Korean food is very stinky, that like I had to hide it, and I didn't. And actually, that reminds me, I remember when I was dating, I remember thinking, God, I don't know, because I always assumed I was gonna marry a white man, basically non-Korean man, and I was really worried that he wouldn't like my stinky food. You know what I mean? Like that was an actual worry for me, or concern for me. And of course, luckily my husband loves kimchi, and so and all that stuff. But yeah, it now is like so embraced and welcomed and even celebrated, and I actually feel, because of the popularity, it's now cool to be Korean. Yeah, so it's very different.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this one kind of ties into the last one. I'll say it, but how would you describe your cultural identity today? Do you feel more Korean, more American, or something uniquely your own?
Yeah, I don't feel 100% American either, quite honestly, in the sense that like I have a longing for Korea. Like I feel like that's my birth country. I mean, obviously it is. Like so, I'll always have an emotional connection. But I also know, like there was a time when we were there in 2013. Like I thought about like, could we live here? Like, could we move? And yes, like we could and adjust, but I'm like, I don't know if I would ever feel like Korea was 100% my home country either,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So in a sense, like I still don't feel like I fit 100% in either culture, but I feel like it's uniquely my own in that I can have my home wherever I am and my family's at. But yeah, it's definitely not one or the other.
That's a fantastic response. Okay, very last one. What advice would you give your young? What advice would you give to? Actually, I'm gonna change it. What advice would you give to your younger self when you were struggling with questions of identity and belonging?
That it'll be okay. That it's not always good. I mean, this is the part of the advice that I give to the kids that I work at the school, right? I'm always telling them it's like, this is the hardest time in your life because you have no control over your life. But know that when you get older, you will have a say in what where you live and how you want to handle things, and so it'll get better. I'm going to say just hang in there, it'll get better. And that this life experience will only just make you a better person, more empathetic and understanding, and have more tools to be able to relate so many people in a real deep emotional connection with people that I know I wouldn't have without had I not had this kind of sad experience.
Is that the advice that you would give to younger adoptees as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's easier because as far as like culturally, because like I said, Korea is not like it's actually kind of cool to be Korean these days. But the whole cultural that identity part, like trying to fit in, it's okay to be yourself. That like your little eyes, like there's nothing wrong with them. They're actually beautiful. Remember like there was a moment when Molly, remember saying, she said to me, I wish I had little eyes like you because she has big eyes like daddy, and I was just like so touched by that, like to have my daughter say like she's actually proud to have, or she would prefer to have my little eyes, my little Korean eyes versus the big, American eyes that she has from her dad. Um, yeah, I want to say that be proud of who you are no matter what you look like.
Beautiful. That brings us to the conclusion of this interview. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys.